Gospel according to Luke chapter 9.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now about 8 days after these things, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on a mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which was about to be accomplished in Jerusalem. Now Peter and John and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with them. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them. They were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud a voice came that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met him. Just then a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." Suddenly a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks. It convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here." While he was coming, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Today is what we often refer to as Transfiguration Sunday. And if that sounds like a big word, it kind of is. But it's a day when we recognize and remember this an important event that happened while the disciples and Jesus were traveling to Jerusalem, where the mission of Jesus would be fulfilled. It is the time of the Feast of Booths. This is a holiday that happens shortly before Passover, where Israel, basically, they leave their dwellings, their homes, and they go and they live in little wooden cardboard shacks, basically. Little temporary residences, very small, and it's to remind them that of how God provided for them when they had no home, when they were living in temporary spaces, when they were homeless, wandering in the desert. Every year the nation of Israel does this, and people today still do this. They go and they live out in their front yard in little shacks, temporary wooden structures, very small, one-room, tiny things. This is the holiday that's going on, when all of a sudden Jesus takes his disciples and he goes away off to a mountainside to pray. Now in the gospel passage I just read, there are 2 parts to this story, and they seem very well like they don't go together, they don't fit. One is what we refer to as a mountaintop experience. The disciples, or 3 of them, get to go with Jesus, and they have this powerful one-on-one moment, this incredible life-changing experience. They're away from the world, they encounter something special about Jesus, and they're just awed and filled, and it's one of those great moments in life. At times, I'm sure you've had maybe at least fleeting glimpses of moments like that. The second part of the story is when they have to return to what we often refer to as the real world, the realities of life and all of its evil and ugliness and brokenness, and everything that's wrong is just kind of radiating and standing out because they've just had this powerful experience. So there's 2 parts to this story that don't seem to go together well, but as we unpack them, hopefully we'll uncover some connections. So the first part, like I said, is when the 3 disciples are closest to Jesus get to go away and they have this mountaintop experience. They get to see a portion of the true glory of Jesus, of God. And they're wowed. They're awed. This is a time that just changes them. And just like with the story of Moses, we learned an important truth. When you encounter God, when you encounter God's glory, you can't help but be changed. It's impossible. It's like radiation. It just seeps into you and changes and transforms you. That's what happened to Moses. That's why he was glowing every time he encountered God. Because God's glory changes everything that's around it. And so the disciples, they get to see just this portion, this reflection of the glory of God, and because of it, Jesus is shining, he's glowing. And of course, there with him, to attend to him, is Elijah and Moses. And as I read this passage, I always wonder, how in the world did the disciples know it was Moses and Elijah? It's not like there were pictures of them. It's not like there were like artwork everywhere, and there's portraits, or there's the internet, and everybody could just look up, this is what Moses looked like. It's not like they had money with the face of Abraham Lincoln on, right? We all know what Abraham Lincoln looks like because we see it all the time. We see images of Lincoln, but Moses and Elijah, I always wonder, how is it the disciples knew that? Obviously, Jesus must have later on explained a few things to them. But as they encounter this incredible scene, Peter doesn't know how to respond, so he does the only thing he can think of. He says, well, it's a celebration. We're supposed to have these separate little shelters we're supposed to live in. Let me honor God by building a shelter for all three of them. And as he says that, there's this incredible cloud, this presence of God, that comes and surrounds them, and the disciples are terrified. And then, despite seeing this spectacular show, this incredible thing, there's these words of God, and they say exactly what I don't expect. Because I would expect God to say, look at Jesus, see who he is, see his glory, watch him. I would expect God to say something like that because God has just done an incredible thing, a spectacular visual effect. But God doesn't say, look at Jesus. God says, this is my son. Listen to him. Those are important words. The entire Gospel of Luke is Luke writing to someone named Theophilus. That could be a specific person or group of people. But throughout the entire Gospel is an invitation. The author, Luke, is constantly inviting whoever is reading it to come and invite them to encounter the good news, the freeing, incredibly wonderful good news of Christ. And to do that as you encounter God. Worship, as we are gathered today to do, worship is simply when we proclaim God's glory and encounter God's glory. And every time we gather to worship, we are going to be changed. But oftentimes, people get this idea that they're supposed to sit back and watch and worship. They're just supposed to see the nice singers and see the visual effects and listen and watch judge whatever the pastor happens to be wearing that day. But the reality is, when we encounter God in worship, we are both changed, but we also participate. And our participation centers around that word that God gives us. He says, listen. Because as we worship, and as God's glory is proclaimed, we need to listen to what might be told to us. For God is not silent, and Jesus is speaking to us. God has not stopped communicating with us. And the most important part of worship, outside of giving glory to God, is for us to listen. Because as we are changed, words of truth are spoken in a worship service. They are sung in a worship service. Words of truth are prayed in a worship service. And as we listen to that truth, it changes us. And then we are invited, as we go back to the normal things of life, we are invited to bring that good news, that transformation, that change to the world around us. You see, in this story, worship just isn't about those mountaintop experiences. Worship is when we take those mountaintop experiences, which is what we encounter on Sunday mornings when we gather, when we are connected with God, when we are rejuvenated, when God's glory is proclaimed, when truth is sung and prayed and preached, and we are changed. We take those experiences back with us as we are changed to the rest of the world. It's a broken, evil place where evil is taking innocent children and doing harm to them. And it's not good enough for us to say we are powerless to change that. It's not good enough for the world to say, we tried to fix it with the disciples, they just weren't up to the task. Which explains why Jesus was so frustrated. Worship is not supposed to be just about what we do on Sunday mornings. It's about how we are changed and bring that transformation to a world that so desperately needs it. So we gather together, we proclaim God's glory. That's what worship is. That's what encountering God is. And then we take that back with us wherever we go. For the broken, the evil, those who are being manipulated, taken advantage of, those who are overwhelmed with the hopelessness of life, and receive hope through the words, actions, attitudes that we take. In order for that to happen, in order for worship to change us, in order for our encounters to be significant, we have to be more than just observers in worship. We have to participate. And for all of us, participation is going to look a little different. I'm not going to tell you that when you come to worship, you have to feel one thing or another. I'm just going to implore you to be changed by worship. It means we participate. Participation means more than just sitting or standing when we're supposed to. It means opening our hearts. It means proclaiming the truth and the glory of God through word, through song, through prayer. And it involves listening. Listening to what God might be saying to us so that we can take whatever that might be to a world that desperately needs it. Each day, each time you worship, it's going to be a little different. But it's also going to be something that changes us. And we can never discount the changes that are wrought in our lives. Amen?
Amen.
There's a short video I want to show you. Let's go back and watch the video that was shared.
The word gospel translates to news that brings joy. But this isn't just any news. A gospel is news that changes a life forever. After being invaded and enslaved by Persia, Greece won two decisive battles at Marathon and Solus. The Greeks sent out heralds, also called evangelists, to proclaim the good news to the cities. We have fought for you. We have won. And now you're no longer slaves. You're free. The reality is that we are all slaves. Slaves to sin and slaves to death. We are slaves in need of good news. Enter Jesus, God's Son, fully God, fully man, bringing news that would change our lives forever. His news was this: I am the divine, come to you to do what you could not do for yourself. I will take what you deserve so you can have what I deserve. You have no idea how much it will cost me, but you also cannot imagine the depths of my love for you. It is a gift that I give freely. So repent. Repent from all the ways you run from me and follow me. Follow me because I am the only way to eternal life. Follow me because I am the Savior you've been looking for. Follow me because I have authority over everything, yet I have humbled myself for you. Follow me because I died on a cross for you, because I'm your true love and your true life. This is my good news for you. This is my gospel, that you have been saved by grace, and that you are slaves no more.
Our takeaways for today. Luke is promising his community that if they want to see Jesus and have their hearts set on fire with good news, they should come to worship. This is how we have our hearts set on fire. We encounter God's glory as God's glory is proclaimed, as God's glory is sung and prayed. And the second one, as followers of Jesus, we are invited to a deeper engagement of our faith. We are not invited to be observers of worship, but to be participants, to listen, and to take the changes that are wrought in our lives into the world around us. Let's stand for our song of the day.